Canon Puncture, episode 79.
This episode of the Canon Puncture Show was recorded on Tuesday, August 4th, 2009. No, you didn't mishear it. That did say this was recorded in August, so it's been a few months. It turned out that my side of the audio sounded horrible, so it took quite a bit of massaging to get everything to where it was listenable. This is the first in what I'd like to do more of, which is play-centric, single game focused types of interviews with people who are advocates of particular games. I hope you enjoy the interview, and I gotta admit that the thing is a little bit out of order. I think Arnold did a fantastic job of shaping everything together into a pleasant conversation and a breakdown of Little Fears. But you will notice that we start talking about parts of Little Fears without telling you what it is. But it is a kids horror game that came out in 2001. And when we recorded this, the Little Fears Nightmare Edition wasn't out yet. But it is out now. You should check it out. And Arnold did end up running Little Fears Nightmare Edition for me. It's pretty cool. But I really want to play the original because they're very different games. So please give me some feedback and let me know what you think about this particular episode. The show at canonpuncture.com. Thanks. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Canon Puncture Show. This is a special episode of the Canon Puncture Show. I'm going to sit down with the gamer I just recently met at a convention here local in Jacksonville. He was the highlight of the con for me because he's now joined my gaming group.
Well, that's very flattering of you to say.
Absolutely, though. Yeah, I mean, meeting you and Beth and Will, which all three of you guys knew each other beforehand, was fantastic. It was so nice to meet another group of people who like indie games. So it was neat.
I'm glad that I went. It looked like Ancient City Con was going to be so strange in those trad games, and I was so out of place. But no, it was fantastic to see guys like you and Rich, and I think Don was the other one that we had that was so enthusiastic, wanted to try some new stuff. It's a good time.
Yeah. So this is Arnold Cassell. Hey, Arnold, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's going on?
So, Arnold, you ran Mountain Witch and Cold City for me, and then you ran some Little Fears, and I had already kind of committed myself mentally to playing in a game of Dread, because I've had that game since Gen Con 2008.
I'm so glad you got to play it. It's a lot of fun.
You know, I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to play Little Fears.
You will. Don't worry, you will.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. You know, my wife bought a copy of the book. I've never looked at it. Let's have a little conversation about Little Fears, if you don't mind.
I'm happy to do it. It's a great game. I love talking about it.
Hi, this is Sean Nittner.
And this is Justin Evans with Narrative Control,
a podcast about our gaming experiences. Come on over and visit us at narrativecontrol.com.
The conversation continues there.
I'm trying to figure out how to introduce the concept of this interview. I've always interviewed the game's designer, but you're just fan?
An avid fan. Little Fears has been and always will be my favorite task resolution game.
Have you not tried D&D 4th edition?
You know, maybe I should switch. Maybe I should start making a level-based system so that the kids can be ported over somehow. A lot of books have come out to mimic it, but they've come out in their own mechanical systems, and none of them really have the punch that this game does.
Like what?
Well, Blair did a lot of research into, the Bureau of Statistics and numbers and things on the amount of children that go missing and that are victims of certain acts. And I don't want to say he gets preachy about it, but he certainly doesn't ever forget it. And he never lets the players forget it. It's very easy for the children to be in real danger, not just from these, mythical make-believe monsters, but the actual real adults around them. And, his work even got praised by some psychologists, psychiatrists that said it was a good tool for therapy because it it didn't pull punches. It emulated reality pretty closely. In the dichotomy of the system, and the little kids, when they're acting against monsters, it's really easy for them, on the grand scheme of things, because all they have to do is pass an internal test, in the way the mechanics are written. All you have to do is roll under your stat. It has absolutely nothing to do with this mythical monster in front of you. You're fighting a werewolf or a closet monster. It doesn't matter. So long as you can pass your feat test, you can get away. Those numbers are completely out when you're dealing with a real adult. Should you be the victim or confronting an actual human being, you're basically powerless. And I think that's kind of one of those really stinging points of this game, that, the monsters and everything else, they're after the kids' innocence, and they'll leave the kids alone once they've lost all their innocence or whatever has happened. But the adults, once they get it in their head that they're going to act against these children, they really have no recourse. And it kind of puts a lot of burden on adults. I mean, they're in the game. They don't really help the kids at all. They have no way to interact with the things that the kids know are real, but the adults don't see anymore. The monsters only appear to children, and once you've lost your innocence and grown up, you've got your blinders on, and you can't interact with them. You don't even believe them. It's almost like he's pointing, and he never actually does this, but it's almost like he's pointing the finger of blame at adults, because these kids are going through this trauma, and it's because the adults just refuse to listen to them on some level. They just refuse to believe the kids. They're like, oh, there's nothing in your closet. Forget it. Get over it. Grow up. I mean, that kind of theme pervades it. And, it doesn't have to turn in that way, but it almost seems like Little Fears as a session, or maybe even as an entire campaign storyline, fails if at the end of it, nobody has anything to talk about. If at the end of it, everybody's fine with what happened in the game, and they're like, well, we were just kids. He kind of thinks, well, maybe you guys need to talk about this. Maybe you guys need to actually feel something. Maybe change, maybe not, maybe just realize. I mean, he puts forth this, obviously it's a role-playing game, and he puts forth this fantastic layer over it, which it would be hard even for a kid to believe, the level of fantasy he's driven to write about in this game. But on the other hand, it's very easy to look at a kid and ask them, random things, and then come up with the most bizarre answers that adults would never even conceive of, let alone believe in. And he's kind of pointing the finger and saying, we have two very, very different worlds, and it's the kids that suffer in that mismatch.
Interesting.
But the game isn't primarily about that. The game's fun in other ways. The game's a lot of fun because it convinces people, and it does pretty well, of, rolling back that mental meter. Even the character creation. I mean, for goodness sakes, the back of the sheet is awesome. It speaks kid language, and it forces players to speak kid language. And it lets them create a very easy to grab onto, fully fleshed out idea of a character, of who they are, of what they know, of what they believe in, of how they act in certain situations. And the number system is painfully easy. I mean, we made it a little easy with modifications. It's not much, but the numbers are very, very simple. It's not a game that really requires a lot of deep thought. It doesn't force the kids to behave like adults in any situation. They always have the option of behaving like children. They should behave like children. I mean, he goes through with his classic example is, oh, look, there's some bad thing happening. You want to play Hot Wheels? And yeah, the kids can absolutely sit there and play Hot Wheels instead of being adults and dealing with situations. I mean, it's a game that encourages and fosters a childlike environment. There's a lot of transference in this game.
Transference?
There's a lot of people, getting deep into character. You know what I mean? Like, maybe not transference is the right word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Immersion?
Definitely. Immersion. Transportation. It takes you to a place. And it's a lot of fun. It's actually got a lot of, I don't want to say subtle, but a lot of somewhat hidden hooks for the GMs as well. I mean, they get to take things off the character sheet and kind of tailor what's going on to the kids. It's very hard in Little Fears to write an entire adventure spontaneously at the table from what the children are going to give you on their character sheet. And it's mostly because Little Fears has a practice of keeping a lot of knowledge out of player hands. And it's mostly, I assume, to keep it out of children, out of their knowledge, because most of the stuff that they keeps behind the screen is, I don't want to say the monster manual, but he has this very elaborate, rich, dark pantheon of forces that work in his closet land. And it's not stuff that a normal, average, everyday kid would know or should know. And if they did know it, they would have all sorts of issues. I mean, they'd be in absolute terror all their whole lives. And I don't think that's the angle he's really going for in this game. Mostly the system is developed for, he's got 3 modes in there, sitting around a campfire and playing and, trying to take it a little bit more realistically. And then he has his true horror mode. And true horror mode is when when you get the right players, and he cautions you against doing this with strangers, of course. But when you start exploring, actual issues that people might have encountered in their younger, more formative years, especially if you know the people personally, and I think that's kind of his goal, although he never states that true horror is the only way to play the game. He says it's the best way to play the game. It brings people's issues to the table, and it makes the game playable. It lets people actually focus in on what might have actually happened to them, or issues that they wish would have gone differently in their childhood. And it begins to be a bit more of a I don't want to say a friendship exercise, but an exercise in kind of a therapy and trust and really being open with each other. And I think that's what he was going for, although it gets a little misunderstood because the subject material it can be dark. I mean, it's not like childhood was all, chutes and ladders and Candyland for everybody.
So let's step back.
What you got?
So, Little Fears. When did it come out?
Little Fears came out 2001. Small press release of about 3,000 copies by Key 20 Publishing, and it's become exceedingly difficult to find since then.
And what's the front cover pitch, or what's the elevator pitch for Little Fears?
The elevator pitch is the back cover, not the front cover, and it says, you ever wonder where the monsters of your childhood went? And the pitch is, in a nutshell, the players are going to take on the role of children, and they're going to be beset by monsters that they know are all too real, werewolves and boogeymen and closet monsters and things like that. And as they progress through childhood, these monsters and things are going to come after them because they have innocence, and these monsters feed on innocence. But eventually, the players are going to, outlive and outlast, and their innocence will slowly wane as the years go by, and eventually the monsters will leave them alone. And I think the beauty of this system is that it asks the question, without answering it, which is the better way? Is it better when you had innocence and belief and all this good stuff, but you were plagued by these monsters, or when you grow up and it all goes away? And everybody has a different answer for it. It's not about playing the game.
Hey, this is Fred Hicks from Evil Hat. Looking for RPG podcasts? You got them at rpgpodcast.com.
When you've played it, what's the game? What is the subject of the game at the table? In play, have you been able to address those themes, or does it come out differently?
Well, sometimes. It all depends on the group you've got. Playing at a convention is one thing. Playing at a convention, you've got a scenario that you've already written out and you've got so many hours to put through. And I don't want to say it's like a classic traditional game with a monster and a boss and everything else. Some people come to the table with that kind of belief, and it kind of rolls into a little bit of that. Kids just trying to get through a series of events so they can get to the payoff at the end. But when you get to play it with, a longer term, when there's no real set in time, there's no real schedule, it excites tracks a lot, and in a good way. A lot of people, when they create these kid characters, you're forced to create kind of a list of non-player characters along with your character. Several questions on the character sheet ask you, who do you go to when you're in trouble? Who can you always trust? And those aren't meant to be other players. Those are meant to be, authority figures or adults or maybe your older brother. And these get worked in. And, the more options, it gets, your basic storytelling game. When the more the player and the GM kind of work around those NPCs and start to develop more relationships, you can get kind of a deep sense of feeling in the game. It's really actually kind of cathartic and really nice. But, then again, sometimes being as unstructured as it is and seeing the mechanics rather simple, some people get sidetracked and they get kind of disruptive. It's the same issues you get with any game. There's the difference between role playing and just being. And sometimes when people jump into the heads of a young mind, they want to be a disruptive young mind. Sometimes you have to guess at which age they think. When they might say their characters, 10 or 11 years old, and they might be behaving like a 5-year-old, or what you think is a 5-year-old. I don't know.
What are some of your favorite moments in actual play that you've experienced?
As a player, I think I had more fun. There's a guy that loves running this game, and he usually runs it at Dragon Cons. And he ran an adventure for us, a kind of a module where we all had played kids that were orphaned. We were on the street somehow. And it was actually a pretty tough emotional game, really. I mean, we're dealing with kids that had been kind of cast out, and they didn't want to be in orphanages, and they wanted to be, on their own. They really didn't trust any adults. They kind of made their own little secret society in the subway. I mean, and it wasn't fictitious to the point where, what do you call it, Neverland. It wasn't like these kids were forever young and had everything taken care of. It was hard. But what happened was a supernatural threat came to prey on these kids because they were all kind of concentrated in one area and didn't have any protection. The cool part was that we had kind of played out through several scenes earlier this growing relationship with these strangers, and it was almost like the fable of Momotaro, where he befriends all of these little squirrels and dogs and things by giving them his bread when he only had so little. And eventually they come to his aid because they realize he's a nice guy. We kind of had done the same situation, and it was really nice that, we had been playing these naive, innocent kids, and we had kind of been fearful towards the end of it that, oh man, we're going to get railed because we had nothing. We had nothing. We were just kids. We'd already spent all of ours. But in the end, it was because, the strength of our childhood belief in karma and if you do good will happen to you. And then we kind of got rewarded for that. And there's a mechanic for it in the game. It's true. Kind of the belief magic thing. But it was nice that it was a good story that worked out. And in the end of it kind of like we all had that burden taken off of us. We're like, oh man, these kids that we've created, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay because of what we did with them. It was a nice feeling. And I like trying to get that out of players when I run the game. But, you can never really tell when someone walks away from the table exactly what they got out of it. So, for me, the easiest good example of a great time was playing it because I knew exactly what I'd gotten out of it.
What do you see other players loving about the game?
Oh, man, a lot of them really love filling out the character sheet. I mean, I think hands down, a lot of them would pick that as the best fun because it's not a normal character sheet, I mean, there's not a lot of numbers to it at all. It's sentences, I mean, it's like, I hang out with, and then there's a bunch of blanks. And then you're like, but blank is my best friend, And then there's like, when I know monsters are around, because kids know about monsters. They know about the thing under their closet or under their bed and in their closet. I mean, they know, and they may even know about, adult monsters like the guy that drives up in the van and offers some candy. But I mean, kids always have something that they'll do. I mean, maybe they run to an adult. Maybe they flip out their cell phone. You're playing games nowadays where kids are like, yeah, when I was 8, I had a cell phone. They're like, I make a call. I call 911. Well, it's little things they get to kind of get in the head of their character. They're describing their character not in numerical terms, but in actual terms. What am I going to do? What am I good at? And, what's my home life like? What do I want to be when I grow up? That is the best question on that character sheet. You get so many answers. You get some people that want to play a rather younger character and say, when I grow up, I want to be a kitty cat because they don't have to do any work and they just lay in the sun all day. And it's cute, little answer. But sometimes they're like, when I grow up, I want to be a firefighter because I think saving people is important. And it really gives them a chance to kind of exemplify their belief, and they get to try and act that out as they're playing. And I think easily that's the most fun part of the game, is that simple 10-minute step walking through character creation and coming on, oh, look what I got. You almost get that childlike glee out of their faces when they're showing you the character sheet before you start playing. It's a good time.
So why Little Fears? I mean, there are a lot of horror games out there, and you could easily just set them to have children involved. I mean, you could do that in a White Wolf game. You could do it. You
could, and they did that. They made a game called Innocence. White Wolf did it in the World of Darkness series. But I mean, it's too little, too late, and it's after the fact. Little Fears came out, in 2001, and on top of being one of the newer styles of play for the time, I don't think any of these games that have come out since then, like Fable or anything else, they put too much of the horror on these, extra planar or whatever monsters that are outside reality. And Little Fears, it doesn't really do that. I mean, true, there are monsters, but on the same side, they're adults, and adults can do bad things too. And Blair kind of gives you an out. He says that, well, when adults do bad things, it's because the kings, the seven big honchos of the Closet Land, they've affected the adults some way. But I mean, he gets into things of, a mother getting frustrated with a kid coming home. Mommy, look what I did. Check out my report card. And, snapping and just slapping the kid and instantly feeling bad about it. But still, she took that action. She hurt the kid because she had a bad day. And, he gives you the easy out and lets you explain it away as, well, it's probably because they were being possessed by one of these kings temporarily. But in the other hand, he doesn't ever free them of the responsibility or the consequence. The adult has done the act out of whatever feeling they had, and now they have this burden. They feel bad about it, but what do they say to the kid? And the kid knows. They don't even know. I mean, they're kids looking to their authority figure, and they've just gotten this violent response, and they don't know how to deal with it. And none of the other games really, they don't really do that. It's all monsters versus kids, and it's 8-year-olds versus werewolves or vampires or whatever, and there's no ability for the GM to really throw in that layer of realism just to kind of wake the players up and say, monsters aren't the only things. I mean, we as adults kind of have to take some responsibility for treating kids in a different way, and we forget to do that sometimes. I don't see any of that in any of the new games that have come out. I don't. So for me, Little Fears has always been the best. And the system is so blindingly fast. You could teach this to a 5-year-old in 20 minutes. Kids can play Little Fears effortlessly. I mean, there's no sense in convoluting childhood actions with a bunch of extra rules because they're kids. They don't need a lot of rules to what they do.
So this is a pretty heavy game, isn't it?
It has the power to be. Yes, it absolutely does. It doesn't always reach that, and I have shied away sometimes. I've had failings where I think I could push, but I don't. And, like I say, it can devolve into players just wanting to be kids and wanting to be silly and play with Hot Wheels and act out and, be ADHD for a couple hours. And
Arnold, would you say that is people not understanding what the game's about, or do you think,
absolutely
or have
not.
you witnessed it been people running from that heavy subject? Why do you think people choose to play that way?
That's a brilliant comment, and I have to give you credit. That's a really, really good insight into it. A lot of times, even with players that you're comfortable with and familiar with, you can watch them shrink back into that childlike behavior because they don't want to deal with it. And it's fine. It's a good, acceptable place to be. It's not like the GM is going to say, all right, everybody, you have to behave like adults now, because they don't. I think it gives you the freedom as a player to kind of, I mean, a couple of the games that we played, for instance, the game we were just talking about where we were homeless, we at several points, because some very dark things were happening. I mean, not dark in a metaphysical sense, but I mean, these kids, they're having to scrounge for food and everything else. We had kind of devolved into laughter and making jokes out of it. But I mean, everybody at the table knew we were only joking because we knew this was a serious situation and we just needed a little momentary release. And some players are going to joke and some players are going to try and be silly and be kids or imitate, a cartoon show in the middle of the game. And, the GM doesn't really have the authority and nobody really should tell them to stop. It's just, sometimes the game gets serious and you need a little outlet, and it's cool. And it also kind of feeds back into it because, kids do that, but they do that for different reasons when they're younger. They do that not because they don't want to deal with it, because maybe they don't understand it, or maybe it's just because the way they act all the time. So, I mean, it hits on a lot of levels, and there's no real easy answer to that question, but it's a very good insight.
Well, I've seen it in other games. I mean, you can play with dark themes in quite a few, some of the games I mentioned before, and when a player gets uncomfortable, they'll need that break, that commercial break. They'll need to step away from it, and sometimes it happens in character.
Absolutely. And I think that's the strength of Little Fears is, especially if you can be candid with the people at the end and you go, well, that's the end of the story, and what did you think of? And and start up a dialogue. I think that's really where Little Fears hits its stride. At the end of the game, you almost always have something to talk about. At the end of the game, it's like, well, what do you think about the way the police officer handled, when you guys came to him? They're like, well, I don't know. We were kids and we were talking about this crazy monster. But I mean, still, that guy was a jerk. He could see that we were in terror. And like, well, he didn't take you seriously because you're kids. And in the end of it, they're like, man, I can't imagine ever behaving like that. That's just crazy. But on the flip side, a lot of us, after we get done playing a game like that, go, man, I ignore kids all the time when they start to off. They're in the supermarket and they're screaming bloody murder, and I'm just thinking those parents need to quiet those kids down. I mean, it deals with some pretty big things, and it's always something to talk about. Every game, when you're done, you have something to talk about, and it's not always the game. It's usually reality. And like you were asking earlier, a lot of the other games that are out there, they don't do that.
Does the game? I haven't cracked the book. So does the game have anything? This talk after the session or after the campaign, is that dealt with in the book, or is that just something that's happened in your play?
It's something that's happened. He doesn't talk about, he doesn't break down the formal parts of a game. He doesn't just break down, you're going to character create for this session, and then you're going to do this, that, and the other, and you all shows. I think he just kind of operates on the assumption that you're going to be talking to your players the whole time. But I think what's hinted at, or at least the way he hints at that dialogue, is he kind of has a dialogue with anybody that's reading it. If you look at the way he writes, it's a lot of shifting between, here's some issues that are pretty heavy, maybe you should talk to your players before you do this, and then he'll launch into something that's pretty dark, and then he'll kind of flit around and go back to something which is a little bit more mythical, and it kind of takes the pressure off you. And then he goes back to something that's kind of dark, and he kind of shifts a lot. And I think if you play the game as he writes the game, it's going to pause now and again for conversation, and it's going to make people talk about what they believe, because a big part of it is what your characters believe. So a big part of the game itself should be what the players believe. I mean, it should definitely be brought up and at the table. Well, Edwards doesn't believe that there's a metagame mechanic. He thinks that the game has, the rules are too restrictive, and he doesn't see an out. But I think Blair's pretty clear on a metagame mechanic. He has belief magic in there. Basically, the younger characters have advantage because they have more innocence, which makes belief magic much, much easier. And Blair never really sets a hard limit for what belief magic can accomplish. He hints that a bigger thing, a world-changing event would need a lot of kids. You'd obviously need more than a few kids believing in something before it became true. But it's a good way for kids to mix back in, and kind of players too. Whenever they go, wait a minute, things shouldn't be like this. Things should be different. A player can say that in character, out of character, it doesn't matter. And that spurs a belief roll. And because if the kid truly believes or is taught that, reality should function a certain way and it's not going that way, the kids have the power through belief or innocence magic or whatever you want to call it to kind of fix what's around them. But, a double-edged knife, it kind of has a cost. Maybe it's to keep it from being overpowered or whatever you want to call it, but there's always a risk because if the kids really believe something and the dice roll doesn't come out for them, they're going to lose some innocence at that point. They're going to start to understand that the world is a world of order and reason and adult behavior, and that their belief and their innocence and these superstitions don't have any place in it. And it's rather poignant. I mean, the one power that kids really have will naturally against this tide of reason that is the adult world.
So you're saying there's a mechanic with belief magic where a kid can say that's not right and they can affect what's happening?
Absolutely. He leaves in their mechanics for, well, what happens if a kid, the classic example of the monster comes out of the closet and it's one of those serial killers from the movies and he's got a chainsaw and the kid puts the blanket over their head because the kid knows that the chainsaw can't go through that blanket. Maybe it can't. Maybe it really can't. And the younger characters are going to have an advantage on that role. And, they can impose reality, their own rules and logic on these creatures. They can impose that restriction on them based on what they believe and what they feel should happen. I mean, and it's kind of double-edged. At the same time, if they step on a crack and somebody goes, oh no, you stepped on a crack, you might have, they might actually come home that day and find their mother's hurt. It's still a role. It's not an automatic thing that happens, but the younger characters are going to be better at it, and they have the power to protect themselves and to be shielded at least a little bit from closet land because of their innocence. It's so profound and so powerful that it has reality-altering effects.
So if a child in the game mechanically they try to believe that the cover protects them from the serial killer and it doesn't, does that mean that their reality magic is broken? Their innocence is...
It doesn't shatter right away. Anytime belief magic doesn't work, you get a little tick in a box. And when you get 10 ticks in that little box for any reason, and you can get them for a couple different reasons, but whenever you get 10 ticks, that point of innocence goes away forever. And losing a point of innocence happens naturally every year, but basically it means your kid, if you want to think about it, is kind of spiritually a year older because they realize that they're behaving childishly and that it doesn't get them what they want. It doesn't have adult power. It doesn't have that reality, that ring to it, that adults seem to walk around with that swagger of authority. And it's because they don't do childish things. They don't believe in teddy bears that can come to life. They don't play with dolls. But little kids can do that. They can play with dolls and they can play with bears and they can do things like that. And their G.I. Joe might just protect them from some goblin coming in through their alarm clock. It just might. It might indeed. But when they truly believe in it and when they say, oh, goody, G.I. Joe's going to save me, and he doesn't, that has a cost, I
like that cycle. That's pretty fascinating. I like that there's a cost. If a lot of games you try to perform some kind of reality bending magic and it's a pass or fail, and the only possible outcome in a negative sense is that you didn't stop the monster, so the monster walks up and smacks you.
Yeah. Well, this one it takes it a step further because it's obvious, and innocence can never be regained for any reason whatsoever in this game. That's something that has to be pointed out. You will lose innocence as you grow older or as things happen to you. It is inescapable. The game is it almost feels like the Twilight hours because you're trying to hold on to that. You're trying to capture or recapture, I guess, for us older people. You're trying to recapture that feeling of innocence and love and look back on it with some positive light. But at the same time, in the end, it almost feels like that loss is a good thing because in the end, at least in the game mechanics, that loss of innocence, you become invisible to the monsters. They don't see you. They don't interact with you. They don't have any care for you. So you gain immunity, but you kind of lose that fascination. It's a really nice statement, if you will. I mean, without being preachy or without trying to proselytize, he kind of hints at eventual and inescapable loss of innocence, and he puts it in the game mechanics very well and very seamlessly.
Anything else about Little Fears we haven't discussed that you think is noteworthy?
Well, a little thing for anybody who wants to pick it up and play it. The soul mechanic that's in it right now is a little awkward, and I don't know if it's maybe because he had kind of blended 2 editions in order to make this book. He wrote 3 editions of the game, and he blended a second and third to make the finished product. Soul and fear are 2 stats in the game that have an inverse relationship in that, monsters can make direct attacks on children's souls, and that's kind of how they feed off kids is through that, kind of almost like using kids as a mana source, if you want to think of it that way. They kind of steal children's souls little by little, not all monsters, but some of the more dangerous ones. But at the same time, when kids encounter things that are spooky to them and when they get involved in these adult or these monstrous, terrible situations, they can also gain points of fear. They really do the same thing, losing soul and gaining fear. So anybody that's actually going to play, we've kind of made our own mod that soul is just discarded because it's the inverse of fear anyway. Because if you use the soul mechanics as they're used in the book, it very easily devolves into either the game is all about soul or it's ignored. Because the soul mechanics, that whole darkening effect, it's so tangential to what normal play is like that it either robs the entire session or it's ignored. So, anybody that's willing to play it, please make a few small adjustments, and the game it'll fly. It's amazingly smooth mechanic, and it's a great fun time.
How do you get hold of a copy of Little Fears?
Well, that's going to be pretty hard. If you're savvy and you can snipe eBay, you can get them for, $30 to $40. Some of the rarer book sellers, old out-of-print book carriers like abebooks.com, or things like that, they'll carry the books, but they'll charge you about $100 for it because it's been around for a while. There weren't that many copies. A lot of people bought them to destroy them because they were controversial. It's been hard to find. There's a PDF floating about there. Not that I advocate stealing it, but if you want to try it, try and find the PDF. And thankfully, Little Fears Nightmare Edition is coming out soon. And hopefully, with a new book, that'll bring a resurgence of interest, and maybe some more people will come out of the woodwork and sell their old copies.
Same designer?
Yeah, Jason Blair is releasing a Nightmare Edition. Looks to be Halloween this year. He spent 8 years trying it from different angles because he started and stopped a lot. He wanted the Nightmare Edition to do something different. So I'm not sure they're going to be the same game. And I think decidedly so. I think Nightmare is going to really be a different game. It's going to feel different. A lot of what's going on in the background, with the pantheon that used to be there in Little Fears won't be there in Nightmare Edition, and for good reason. He wants to change the feel of the game. So you may see a bunch of people that like the new edition better maybe, or just want to try something different. And hopefully we'll see some more copies of Little Fears on eBay soon, because that would be delicious. I love it when it changes hands and people get to try it for the first time. Or if they really, really want to try it, they should go to Dragon Con, because as long as I'm alive and Tobes is alive, somebody's going to be running this game at Dragon Con every year. It always sells out. It always has a good crowd, and we always have a good time with it.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking some time, Arnold. I appreciate you talking with me about this game. I'm really interested in you eventually running it for me.
Absolutely. And hopefully when he's done with this Nightmare Edition and maybe he has some time, you can get an interview with Jason Blair and get his take on it, because I'd love to hear what he has to say.
I think I'll have to see if I can do that.
We had such potential, such promise.